Okay, so today I'm really looking forward to the conversation here with Jay, and we already had a lot of things that we figure out in our pre-conversation here that we have in common. But yeah, man, Jay, you're an early Bitcoiner. We figured out an actual OG, and now head of the marketing at Avalabs, the dev arm basically behind Avalanche, which recently made big news in the crypto space. But yeah, before we get into all those things, man, how is everything going in New York?
Really well. I mean, I don't know if you heard, but there's a hurricane that passed yesterday, so maybe everyone's kind of actually figuring out what's happening. I'm in New York City. Luckily, I think everything's been okay. I just walked my dog this morning, so it seems sunny and nice.
Well, I didn't hear about that, but
Yeah, you're gonna hear about it on Twitter probably in
yeah,
like an hour.
okay. Well, good to hear that you're fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I think there's lots to talk about. Obviously, I come more from the Cosmos community. Just organically stumbled upon it, and fell in love with the community, with the idea, with the ideology, which is basically to envision this multi-chain future. And I think projects like Avalanche, even Solana, they also share this vision that, hey guys, let's basically out-cooperate the competition, and the competition in that sense basically being traditional finance, right? Because those are still the guys we wanted to disrupt. And that's why I really appreciate you taking your time. But before we talk about Avalanche, also some details about how Avalanche works, the vibrant DeFi ecosystem that really blew up also with the Avalanche Rush program. Can you share a little bit about your background, your crypto OG story, and how you ended up at Avalabs?
Yeah. So I think the background that I usually overview is stumbled into Bitcoin a little bit by accident. So I think as mostly dumb luck is probably how I'll chalk it up. But luckily, chased those signals and really started to dive a little bit deeper. I think that I remember some of the early times it was really hard to get Bitcoin, and Mount Gox was kind of like the prominent venue, for better or for worse. I think is a whole nother story. But as Ethereum started to come into the conversation, Vitalik was really evangelizing it. I didn't actually quite catch it when it was like the pre stages, but once it started to launch, I started to pay attention to it because I'm not technical. I think we spoke about this off the call, but I do love technology. I've grown up with computers. I've always been fascinated by what it's enabled people to do. And I think I've always chased the question of why. And so Ethereum came out, and that's when I was like, aha, I think I kind of get this a little bit more so than peer-to-peer payments. I was also in the marketing field, mostly marketing for Fortune 500 fintech and tech brands. And it was a natural kind of bridging the gap, if you will. You had crypto coming in or blockchain coming in from the right. You had tech for me, and tech marketing coming in from the left, and all of a sudden you had these big brands saying, hey, we want to leverage blockchain, or we want to figure out how we can market ourselves using blockchain as a service. IBM, I think, comes to mind as one of them. And then on the flip side, you had also the remnants of, or kind of the early rumblings of the 16, 17, and 18 era of the token sale ICO days, where all these small projects were getting hyper capitalized, and all of a sudden they were able to afford these larger agencies like the one that I was at. And we started a marketing consultancy, myself and three others, and we were just crypto nerds, I think, and we were like, I think there's something here. Helped out a handful of projects, did it for a few years, and then from there I was like, all right, I need to actually take the plunge. This is great, but would love to just understand how a crypto project that's fully in the ecosystem, how that operates. Somewhat like how you looked at the Cosmos community and you said, hey, I think there's something there. Let me just totally commit. Because if you're not committing, you're not going to be able to really fully understand the depth and the gravity of what's going on. And so went to a firm called Fluidity. And that's in the Ethereum ecosystem. The two main things that we worked on there was a decentralized exchange called AirSwap, and security tokens. Security tokens super early, and we did a lot of great things. So if people are interested in that, just Google Fluidity and you'll find a bunch of stuff on that. But I won't get into that. What ended up happening is it got acquired by Consensus. So for those that don't know what Consensus is, it's the venture studio, basically going hand in hand with the Ethereum Foundation. So kind of the BD arm of things, and was leading marketing there as well. So it was an incredible experience. Now AirSwap is part of Metamask swaps. so that most people are probably using that, at least if you're interacting with DeFi. And May 2020, that's when I was reached out by John Wu, who's the president of Avalabs, saying, "Hey, would you like to lead the marketing efforts at Avalabs?" And was quite an interesting proposal for me, because it was like, "Hey, do you want to leave the Ethereum ecosystem effectively and start from scratch with a new L1?" And obviously a little scary. Someone who's made a lot of connections in Ethereum and also have learned Ethereum from end to end, but I was also really like that as a challenge. And so here we are. I think we haven't actually veered too much far away from Ethereum for many reasons. I think one, we can touch on it later, but all these L1s are fairly close at the end of the day, Cosmos included, Avalanche, where it's such a small space, so it's really hard to avoid each other, right? So realize it kind of all comes full circle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you also said scary, because we all remember the EOS and NEO kind of L1s that were supposed to kill Ethereum overnight. But, see what's happening right now. I think many of them have died out. And maybe that's not even because they're evil or some kind of things. Maybe that's just because they didn't have product market fit. They didn't have commitment, or I don't know, flaws in the governance, I think was the case for EOS or projects like that. But yeah, I think what you guys have with Avalanche is obviously kind of like this second mover advantage that you learned also from Ethereum's kind of like learnings and best practices, but also from projects that try to dethrone Ethereum or kind of like take over market shares from that, like US or NEO. I think that's a great position. Obviously, the market sentiment, around the world, crypto and blockchain and DLTs are gaining more and more adoption. But yeah, one thing that really caught my attention initially about Avalanche was kind of like the founder and the origin story, right? So Emin is a Turkish American computer scientist, very well known in the space. And I've been to Turkey a couple of times, and the whole crypto community, like, they know him, like he's known there, right?
He's crypto. he's if Vitalik is like, or maybe not Vitalik, but if kind of like Satoshi is kind of like the figurehead and kind of like Bitcoin Jesus, Vitalik is Ethereum Jesus, Goon is Avalanche Jesus, but also crypto Jesus in Turkey.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he was one of the earliest people in the world to kind of like work on peer-to-peer networks, right, in the early 2000s.
Yes.
He's also one of the earliest to research alternative consensus algorithms that do not require hardware and heavy computational resources like what Bitcoin and proof of work does. So can you talk a little bit about your kind of like side of how you got to know him, how is it to work with him, and also kind of like the origin story of Avalanche based on that background and context that Emin Gün brought on the table?
Yeah, so he's just always been in distributed systems research. That's just his lifelong passion. There's plenty of other kind of groups of people that have focused on that. Most widely known would be kind of like the cypherpunks that kind of led into the Bitcoin ecosystem. And what Gun was really trying to figure out was just basically creating something that can scale to the global demands. And of course, while doing that research, the world was continuing to accelerate. The internet was still taking hold, and it's still penetrating the world. I think the last time I checked some global study, it was like somewhere around 50% internet penetration. And so, of course, people like you and me, people that are probably listening in, we're all in a very good situation to have this type of technology at our fingertips. It's something that I always have to remind myself that not everybody has that. And so meanwhile, while the internet's progressing, also distributed systems are progressing. And right as Avalanche Consensus came about, this was when Gun was, and some of the researchers that was working with him, some of them are actually are members of the Avalabs team, was trying to figure out, okay, what's the blockchain trilemma? There's transaction fees, decentralization, and speed, throughput, or finality. These are the things it seems like most systems had to sacrifice one to promote one, and so forth. And what we've come to know with innovations like Avalanche consensus is you actually don't have to sacrifice any of those things. And with Avalanche consensus, it takes on probabilistic consensus as opposed to deterministic consensus, comparatively to like Nakamoto consensus or classical consensus. And so you have this new family of consensus protocols. And from someone like myself and yourself who doesn't have a technical background, the best way we've categorized that is it's a whole new family, and it's basically building it up from the ground up. So really saying, hey, let's not tackle this problem of scalability from like maybe L2s or even on the application layer to see if we can, batch gas transactions or figure out crafty ways to do that. That's the short-term solution. That's totally fine, but perhaps it's better to just restart and see if we can do it from the ground up. So that's where we are now. Gun is incredibly smart with consensus types of works. He's also very, very knowledgeable about the space since he's been here for so long. So just a very, very fascinating person to sound off ideas with. And he's obviously gotten to where he's at because of the talents that he's bringing to the table.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think you already mentioned that Avalanche doesn't, or the consensus algorithm doesn't sacrifice any of the three elements for the trilemma. And I think there's also on-chain data that backs that up. I think there's more than 1,000 validators producing blocks. And the finality is, what is it, less than 2 seconds or even less than 1 second? But it's pretty fast. So that's really cool to see. And I think one of the things that also, at least from my kind of like understanding, I have not done very, very deep research on Avalanche, even though I had it on my radar already a year ago when you guys came out, and I was a very early user in Pangolin, but then I kind of like, didn't stick with it. I don't know. Sometimes it's like that in crypto. You can't go deep on all ecosystems. But one thing is that I guess the consensus algorithm is more kind of like, or structure, borrows some elements from directed acyclic graph technology, right? Like dApps. And that's a different architecture than what the classical blockchain is. And I think it might have even potential to kind of like be the next step in distributed ledger technology. So can you talk a little bit about the elements? I think Gossip Protocol is also what Avalanche is kind of like taking some elements of. How you think Avalanche kind of like is situated in that? Is it more of a DAG? Is it something in between? How would you describe it? And also, how do you see the whole DAG versus blockchain conversation going on?
Yeah. So I usually don't lead with highlighting the chain structure, but I feel like in these types of conversations, most people are pretty knowledgeable about it. So this is where I think I'll kind of overview it. But Avalanche has 3 different chains. It's the platform chain, the contract chain, and exchange chain. And before we get into each one, I'll basically say that the platform chain is the metadata layer, and it basically helps out with governance and staking. So we can kind of put that aside for a second because it's basically just kind of like the operational layer. It's not really something that users will likely use unless they're either staking or participating in governance. Very niche use cases in the grand scheme of things, right? So effectively, you have 2 chains. Every time I said it, actually crashed me up. You have 2 chains. It's one, the exchange chain is what the DAG is. And so when you asked how much is it half or half, it's effectively half or half. So you have the exchange chain is the DAG, prioritizing speed because DAGs enable that. And the contract chain has to be ordered. So DAGs can process transactions in whatever order possible. That's what payments are good for. Contracts, you need that to be ordered because there's dependencies involved. And so with the contract chain, you have a linear blockchain, and the exchange chain is the DAG. So that's basically saying, hey, there might be certain use cases for payments, and you don't need to go through the contract chain. And there might be certain use cases for contracts. And that's where you just require to go through that order. The reason why at the end of the day, I don't want to usually bring this up is because in some very short-term future, likely either end of this year or early next year, we're going to try and abstract that away from the user experience. If you're using MetaMask, you're not going to have to think about what chain to be interacting with. It's as if, imagine if you interacted with Facebook and you were tasked to pick TCP, IP protocols versus other things, and you had to switch it on and off. isn't quite as black and white as I'm describing it, but you kind of got the idea. Or maybe the better analogy is email, POP3 and IMAP. Of course, some people understand the email protocols, and they're going to configure it based on their preferences, but other people shouldn't care about it. And if it works, it works. And so I think that's kind of the answer there. And hopefully it'll be as seamless as the way we use Web 2.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be very helpful, because I remember also, now that you say it, back in the days when I started, maybe that was one thing that were like, man, I don't know what I should click here, you know?
Yeah.
And it's still, I think, in the Avalanche wallet, that is actually pretty nice. I really like it. But you have to have, like, there's one tab, I think it says Crosschain, and then
Yeah.
transfer tokens between exchange, platform, and contract chains. And I'm like, man, I don't know what I want to even do. I just want to, you know, make a trade or make a swap or make a send.
Yep.
Which chain
Absolutely.
have to be on? So I think it really would make sense to kind of like make it invisible for the end user, because most people probably that are coming into crypto, they don't want to deal with that, right? They don't want to deal with that.
No.
But yeah, I think maybe you can expand a little bit on that, because it's still there. You said already there's plans to kind of like make this invisible, but can you talk more from a user perspective? Anybody who is maybe thinking to become an Avalanche user, what do they have to kind of like consider? Which chain do they use for what actions, and what are your recommendations?
Yeah, so for now, until that kind of improvement gets deployed, what I've been communicating is, what do you actually want to do? If you don't care to interact with dApps, then don't deal with the dApps and just trade any of the Avalanche assets on the exchange chain. And that's kind of just like if you were to pick any other chain, you're just focused on that use case. If you want to use dApps, and especially DeFi, then likely just have your entire experience on the contract chain. And because the Ethereum virtual machine is running on it, all of the Ethereum tooling, with a little bit of configuration at this point, is going to work. So Metamask, I use the same 0x address that I use for Ethereum on Avalanche. All you have to do is switch it with some custom RPC configurations, and you're in. And so that still is a little clunky. And one of the things that, as a team, holistically, a lot of us come from prior crypto experiences, and as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, myself included. And one of the things we learned in early days, and I'm sure people listening in learn this too if you've been around the block, is UX in crypto is abysmal, but not because people aren't good at creating good UX. It's just a complicated problem. You have front end experiences, and the front end experiences have to map that of the back end or the on chain experience. And how do you bridge that gap? How do you handhold the user to explain things? Like, one example I always like to give is early days of MetaMask, when you gave a contract approval, instead of doing 1 or 0 as a kind of binary function saying yes or no, it was saying approve, an amount that's so high that you would never reach that amount. And so you're basically approving infinitely. But as someone who has no idea what they're doing, you go into that ecosystem, or go into that user experience, and you flip it on, and you have 1 to the E, whatever, like so many different decimal point places. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, am I just about to get drained? And is this me giving kind of a unlimited access to this? It's like, no, it's just an approval. So then when you need to call the contract, then it doesn't have to go through the approvals each time. And so these are things that they've obviously improved. And it's more like, let's have English definitions of what this is. And then if you want to look under the hood, you can click that down arrow, and you're like, all right, this is exactly what's happening. So UX is absolutely an important aspect for us. We're not perfect by any means in the Avalanche ecosystem, but I think one thing is we are learning a lot, and EVMs, adopting the EVM as that standard is incredibly helpful, because the cognitive load for users, especially from the Ethereum ecosystem and those that have been around crypto for a while, don't have to think about it. And so one thing that I'll kind of segue into is the Avalanche bridge. The Avalanche bridge is an interoperability bridge that connects Ethereum and Avalanche. And the first iteration of it, we deployed it in February, and there was a lot of different issues with it, from usability. Usability actually is first and foremost, is kind of like the main thing. And so, like you were saying before, we basically got that out to market, and then said, okay, let's just iterate on this as quickly as possible, because we knew that it wasn't a perfect solution, but we weren't actually quite sure how it was going to react, because there were contract calls on both the Ethereum and Avalanche side. when Ethereum gas prices were really high, then crossing the bridge was almost prohibitive. So it didn't actually alleviate anything from the Ethereum side, at least from the Avalanche perspective. And so we've made plenty of improvements. Now I'm actually proud to be saying to people on calls like this to say, okay, check out the Avalanche bridge, bridge.avax.network. You just have to connect to MetaMask, and you send ERC20s, and it just goes to that same address, and you can see it all explained in the front end. And I think that's just something that the way I've described it, it's very delightful to use. It's not like stressful by any means. Just go, oh, this is actually cool. It worked. And then you can kind of move along with your day.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I also remember like back in 2017, early 2018, the only DEXs we had was stuff like Ether Delta, right? It was horrible user experience. But yeah, here we are a couple of years later, and Uniswap, 1inch, also things like Pangolin and other layer 2 bridges, layer 2 platforms, but also layer 1s have really, really great user experiences and also volumes, and people are actually using that. So I think that's one of the major things here. But let's talk a little bit about the DeFi ecosystem. I think that's one thing where Avalanche was really on everybody's map. Was announced 1 or 2 weeks ago, I think, regarding the Avalanche Rush program. That's a $180 million initiative to basically get more dApps to launch on Avalanche, but also to kind of migrate over. And I think one of the first dApps have been Curve and AAVE. Obviously, AAVE, giant lending platform on Ethereum. They have killed it over the past couple of years and established themselves as a DeFi blue chip. But can you talk a little bit more about the Avalanche Rush program and what is still what has been done so far and what is still coming through that?
Yeah, Avalanche Rush has been this concept that's been underway for honestly since the springtime. It's all hands on deck, trying to figure out how to architect this. Incentives is not the hard part. It's all about how to tell that story, but also making sure that you're incentivizing the right platforms in the right ways, and also getting buy-in from the counterparties. The program, as a high level, as you mentioned, is $180 million in DeFi incentives. When it was announced, the Avalanche token was trading at $15. I don't know what it's at now. I think it's like 40 something. So as you can see, the token price has appreciated, and because a lot of those incentives is actually done in AVAX, it's actually more. And that's something that we're trying to figure out how best to communicate once we get the rest of the hard-coded details from the counterparties who are participating in. And then from there, we're going to really talk about this in kind of a real-time manner, because the 180 number is now pretty stale, actually. But we'll get to that, I think, once we figure out the rest of the components. So what I can tell you has been done to date is really getting the DeFi blue chips from the Ethereum ecosystem to be on board. AAVE, like you mentioned, Curve. We also announced Sushi. We have a few more, and Paraswap as a DEX aggregator. We have a few more coming down the pipeline when it comes to Ethereum blue chips. And I think we also have an application process. So really, the opportunities are endless. On the flip side, we also wanted to incentivize the native projects, because these native projects have been with the Avalanche ecosystem since the beginning, through perhaps hard times, and also even some of the good. And it also makes sense, right? Like, they're very incentivized with the culture and the community. That's something that's so unique to crypto. The fact that people really talk about community as if they're a part of it and not just this one-sided conversation. And on the Avalanche side, you have Avalaunch. It's a IDO platform, token sale platform. You also have Yay Games, which is an NFT/gaming dApp. You also have a few AMMs coming down the pipeline. And so we're basically kind of bridging the gaps for both prominent ecosystems. And I also want to say that there also are opportunities for other chains. I think the main reason why we haven't gone towards it just yet is because we don't have a really seamless way to bridge liquidity two ways. And so we're very careful with those decisions. Once we're able to scale out that bridge to other EVM compatible chains, but also other payment chains and things like that, then we're going to be much more confident being like, okay, well, let's say we integrate, I don't know, like EVM, I think of Phantom or BSC. If we integrate them, then we're going to be much more confident in finding out their ecosystem blue chips and seeing if they want to try out Avalanche. At the end of the day, the most important part about this strategy is we firmly believe that once you're in the Avalanche ecosystem, you're going to love it so much that you're not going to move the liquidity back. And that's a bold, bold claim. And of course, it's not going to be 100% foolproof, but we really do think that we have an upper hand in that regard. And so hopefully the next few months will, I guess, either prove me right or wrong.
Awesome, yeah. And I think we're on this call going to also seal the Cosmos partnership and integration of IBC.
Yeah.
But I think another thing also in that context is obviously they also help to kind of like bring Avalanche on everybody's map. Is I think you have also very strong partners, and I think also VC partners on board. I think Sue is a very prominent figure in the crypto space from 3 Arrows Capital, and he's a Avalanche even content creator. I think he has his own podcast as well.
Yeah.
And it's very big behind everything that you guys do. But before we seal the Cosmos partnership, can you talk a little bit about you already mentioned it briefly, but a little bit more about I always say Cosmos, the Avalanche DeFi ecosystem.
Yes.
I think Pangolin is one of the biggest DEXs out there. You also said Avalaunch as kind of like the IDO platform.
Mm-hmm.
And Benqi's got, I think,
yes, Benqi, that's right. I missed that one.
A lending platform. So can you talk a little bit about all these projects and how you collaborate with them, and also kind of like some stats here?
Yeah. So what I can say right now is, let me just pull up just while I bring it up. But the thing that we've seen early days is a lot of the DEXs start coming up, and some of the DEXs that are trying to create new strategies that can occur with low transaction fees and near instant transaction finality being, of course, the Avalanche value, one of the main value propositions. And so you have auto compounders, you have single-sided pools to generate yield, you have lending and borrowing, you have AMM, like kind of the straightforward AMMs. All of these things are obviously the primitives, and that's what we were seeing the last year or so kind of cultivating. The thing that's really fascinating is a lot of these individuals and projects have a lot of crypto experience too. And so, like you said, it's kind of like learning from the past of different chains and different payment chains and things like that, and seeing if you can think of other ideas to solve the problem. Not everything is going to be perfect. Not everything is going to work as expected. But I think that type of innovative mindset is what's really driving a lot of the stuff that's working around Avalanche. And we have a really close-knit community. We have a big kind of community of ecosystem partners. Everyone's always trying to lift each other up, kind of like how crypto should be, just broadly speaking. And maybe that's why we're solidifying the partnership here. Is I think we should all be really working together at this stage. It doesn't really make sense to bring people down because the market is so small relative to the rest of the asset classes of the world. And if we all believe in this distributed future and this future where payments and finance could truly be decentralized at first and foremost, and other things, of course, then it does require everyone to be in concert, I guess. And some stats, just to give you those. So Benqi, I believe, yesterday just crossed 2 billion in TVL. The whole, yeah.
I think it took them like 5 or 6 days to get to 1 billion, right?
Yeah, and it's always, I guess it's always either it smashes expectations or totally is a dud. But when Benqi was about to deploy, we were like, well, I feel like we've tried everything collectively on the Benqi team and Avalanche team and the rest of the community ecosystem to really make this a success, but we'll see what the world thinks. And when it deployed, all of a sudden, I think it got to like 1 billion TVL in less than a day. It was kind of insane. And the incentives hadn't, or I guess, I don't know if the incentives had deployed yet at the time. But the rest of the Rush program hasn't even deployed yet. So point is it was a lot of that kind of hype. You saw people like Sue talking about it. You saw a bunch of these traders who have been around basically waiting on the sidelines, trying to not be first to the party, but also be a part of the party, I think. And that's what you saw in this first wave. And it's still not over. I truly believe that. And I think once things start to unfold, you'll start to see that that's definitely going to be true there. So right now, total value locked on the Avalanche ecosystem, more or less, is nearly 3 billion. It's to 2.762 is the exact amount there. Benqi is leading the charts. You have Trader Joe, incredible project. They actually just announced 5 million in funds raised with 3 arrows as a lead. So Sue again coming in, saving the day. Pangolin, Yieldjack, Snowball, Penguin Finance. These are kind of the big names in the space. And then you have a bunch of also cross-chain implementations, Elk Finance. And then NFTs are getting a lot hotter. I think NFTs on Avalanche actually started from the traditional perspective more so than the decentralized side. You saw big brand names like Topps. And I don't know if you're familiar with Topps, but Topps is a very big American collectibles company, not NFTs or anything, or not digital anything. It's literally on cardboard, and it has a huge community. You have baseball cards that have been sold for millions and millions of dollars, and so pre NFT type paradigm before even the internet. And so the two main leagues that we have worked with in conjunction with Topps is Bundesliga and Major League Baseball. So you're obviously probably familiar with Bundesliga. That's a little bit less popular, I think, in the American side of things, but still got a lot of traction. And so we're going to see actually my Shiba, so Dogecoin. But we're going to see a lot from there, I think. So it should be good.
Awesome. Yeah, I really like that. And I think, like I said, as this kind of like explosive growth in the crypto industry advances, we need alternatives, right? Because Ethereum is simply not usable and it excludes so many people. If you look at the transaction fees now again, even to make a send funds, right? To make a send, you have to pay $8 or $9 or even more than that. And to make a contract call or trade or swap, you have to pay 40, 50, 60 bucks, which is crazy. So I think that's definitely something that, where other L1s that have a functioning product, smart contracts, and ecosystem, and DeFi ecosystem also building on top of, where people can earn yield. I think this is a great position and slot and a good shot for projects to take over some market shares and build a real solid community of real active users. We didn't have that in 2017. We had only papers and great ideas, which was, well, for that time it was what it is, but now we actually have real deployment and users. Yep. And one thing I just came to my mind while you were talking about the incentives is, I think maybe you can talk a little bit about this. From this Avalanche Rush program, also parts of it is allocated as kind of like a kickback for people that make transfers and I think bridge transfers, that they would get an airdrop of AVAX or something like that. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, let me see if I can say the actual number, but high level, that if you transfer over a certain minimal amount, it's not too high. I think it's 75 bucks if I recall correctly. Then you get a little bit of AVAX airdrop. So what that does is two things. It shows people that this new bridge technology that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, it uses Intel's SGX chip. That's what it's kind of built around. There's plenty of documentation on it on the Avalanche blog. So that's kind of where you could probably learn a little bit more about that. But what you effectively can do is then you can incentivize other bridge operators to create and basically fork this design. And if they want to use it as an airdropping mechanism to incentivize people to come into certain ecosystems, great. In our situation, the second kind of prong, I guess, of this approach was to really just further the incentives to want to try Avalanche. It's not even that much because the fees are so low. But still, it's kind of like the comparison I always like to draw is the rideshare kind of go-to-market strategies. If you remember when Uber, Lyft, the rest of the ride-sharing companies came to market, the first thing you saw was, hey, try Uber, and if you refer a friend, you get $15. Same type of thing. You're obviously not going to have 100% success on that, and that's just always the way it is. But at least you can figure out who your customer base is. Maybe some people like Uber because of their black car offering. Maybe someone might like Lyft because simply the logo is pink. There's all these arbitrary reasons why you would have brand affinity to something. And that's where my kind of marketing background comes into play. That's how I always see the world. So based on what you said earlier on, you were saying, hey, like I was an early user of Avalanche for some reason, one reason or another, I just didn't end up sticking with it. Well, that's to me exactly that Uber and Lyft comparison. You must have had certain signals in Cosmos, emotionally attached to it. And then we're all obviously very technical in nature. So you obviously checked off enough boxes and you're like, okay, I'm going to take that path. And that's totally fine. And so I think the bridge is an incredible experience. And with that airdrop, it's really just a no-brainer to at least try, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a freemium onboarding, right? And you just give everybody the chance to test things out. Ethereum doesn't have that, and you need a lot of money to actually make a trade on Uniswap these days.
Yeah,
it's very exclusive. But yeah, like you said, I think the thing for me in Cosmos was really when I started to talk about it, because I had some Atom in my wallet. I'm like, man, what is this actually? And then I started to talk about it, and then a core developer, Jack Zampolin, reached out to me and like, hey, I can walk you through on a call, and he actually did that. And I started to discover the Cosmoverse and dig deep into the Cosmonaut community and also their ideology, which resonates a lot with me. And I think that's also a great transition, because I think also what you guys, like I said earlier, envision is this multi-chain future. You want to have as many bridges and connections as possible. Not to take over market shares and kill Ethereum, but rather to say, hey, this space needs to grow as a whole. A rising tide lifts all ships, so let's out-cooperate the competition here. So in specific, can you talk about some other ecosystems that you are in talks with? And also, obviously, in detail about the Cosmos ecosystem. Have you guys looked into this? Is this something that's in the Wednesday meetings of Avalabs that you say, hey, how do we implement this IBC thing? What is it, and what's the stage here?
Yeah, so there's always quite conversations, and I think probably like majority of them are very philosophical. We're always trying to think through problems. And I think that's what's really cool about crypto in general. I've always seen super, super smart people, also people that are willing to talk to me about crypto for, more than 10 minutes beyond just Bitcoin. And so you obviously have different, like, what ifs, what if we do this, or what if we do that? So with Cosmos specifically, I mentioned this off the call, but we were talking about IBC, and IBC is such an interesting standard. I think there are some compatibility issues right now that, at least as it relates to Avalanche, at least, and that's kind of where we're at now. And so what we're following first and foremost is kind of market size. That's the obvious track. I think most people have that strategy, hence why we chose Ethereum. But if you pick the Ethereum bridge as an example, it can scale horizontally using the EVM compatibility. So a lot of people, or a lot of projects, are leaning into EVM because that's kind of showing its face as the leading standard when it comes to smart contracts, distributed smart contracts. And so that's, I think, something that we're also chasing very deeply. And I think that's what's going to really branch out the connectivity to the ecosystems. I think the opportunities are a lot of different things, and I'll kind of just riff them out, not necessarily with too much commentary, but composability. That's something that I personally care about the most, because if you have too much fragmented liquidity, then the UX also all of a sudden degrades. All of a sudden, you're going to have to remember what's this random letter in front of like BTC. How many different types of wrapped BTC could you possibly have? Short-term solution seems to be pools like Curve. So that's good enough, I think, for now, but it's not good enough for the long run. Maybe Curve makes the new improvement and figures out a way to create one unified wrapped asset or something. Or maybe there's something a little bit more streamlined where Curve's just incorporated in swaps, and you don't have to. It's kind of like how AMM routers function, where you don't actually have to do all the configurations. It just does it for you off chain. And that's kind of where it stands without really saying too much. I think as we continue on in the remainder of this year, we'll really see some of the stuff that I'm kind of alluding to come through the surface. Multiple chains get implemented. It's on the roadmap, at least through the bridge. And then also on the Avalanche layer 1 side of things, we have this capability called subnets that's coming on. And subnets can do a lot of things. But one of the things as it relates to different ecosystems that it can do is if you have different virtual machines of various implementations, so Ethereum, of course, with the EVM, but also whatever other VMs that you could have, then you could effectively have those VMs on Avalanche and effectively have then all of these different chains get scaled by Avalanche consensus. So what I always like to say is it's kind of like Ethereum powered by Avalanche, and maybe Cosmos powered by Avalanche, Tezos powered by Avalanche. And there are multiple projects that are kind of taking that angle. Pretty confident that Avalanche is going to pull this off. We'll see what happens once it's live, of course, and that's what I'm excited for as well.
Awesome, man. I think that's also one of the kind of like ideologies that a lot of Cosmos developers and projects have, is to basically build, establish those seamless connections to basically just offload also the computation, for example, on Bitcoin, right? I had Sunny Agarwal, who is the co-founder of Osmosis, which is a Cosmos-based AMM that basically allows you to trade sovereign blockchains with each other and also provide liquidity in that sense, taking IBC mainstream. But what he said is basically, in fact, he liked Cosmos initially because he was a Bitcoin maxi in the sense maximizing the value or potential of Bitcoin, not in the sense of being toxic and hating everything else. But he thought like, hey, Bitcoin is cool. It's this monetary, revolution, but it doesn't do much, and it's just on its chain and just sits there. What if we connect it to something more scalable, like Tendermint or even the Avalanche algorithm, and we have much more opportunities over there. And I think that's something that might make sense to explore. Maybe leverage synergies between Cosmos, Avalanche, and then Polkadot when Cardano has smart contracts in a couple of weeks and Solana is doing their thing. I think when all those networks come together and you have versions of Bitcoin or even of ETH on all these chains together, and you can provide liquidity, do DeFi with it, I think that's the multi-chain future that also makes sense and helps really people also in countries where they can't afford $50 to make a trade, to be part of that kind of like financial revolution that we're undergoing. So
exactly.
I
totally agree with that.
Really exciting. So actually, I had some of the community questions, but I just went through them, and they're all, when IBC, when are you guys coming to join the Cosmos ecosystem? But I think you can share a little bit about kind of like the roadmap items for the rest of the year. We're in September now. I can't believe it actually. So
I know, right?
A couple of months left. So what is still coming here? What is the main focus for the last quarter then of the year? And also, is there anything that the Cosmos community could do here?
Yeah, so let's see. Let me give you some of the high level points for what's coming up for the remainder of 2021. We have initial litigation offering. It's basically tokenizing litigation fundraising. You could participate in the potential upside or lack thereof, I guess, but potential upside of a litigation, and that's a platform. That's kind of the end goal, but short term, we're going to start with one legal case and based in the US and see how that works. We're working with a law firm called Roche Friedman, based in New York in the United States, and we're also working with Republic, a fairly prominent I guess like equity fundraising platform, kind of like a crowd fundraising platform. That's all regulated in the US at least. And we also have improved features for the Avalanche bridge, which is incredible to see because we just got it out and already we're working on feature improvements, and also just adding more chains to it is also kind of another part of that. Also the wallet. The wallet's going to be improved. We kind of talked about it earlier. You have all these chains that are up there. Maybe we could abstract that a little bit, or maybe we could add tooltips. You're kind of seeing a theme though. This is all kind of the kind of foundational elements for very good UX for people that want to interact with decentralized applications. Browser extension wallet, that's another one. And so holistically, all of this will be coming together in this kind of like cockpit or dashboard. So when you're using this ecosystem, it's no longer fragmented where you're saying, well, I have, let's say I have a browser extension wallet like Metamask. And then maybe if I want to use a dApp, I'll have to go to like dAppRadar or CoinMarketCap to understand which dApps are usable. But it's still not that it's not that clear because it's like all these websites have all these different chains. Which ones work with MetaMask? Of course, most of them do, but some people who don't know the ecosystem might not know that. And so just making sure that those questions are totally squashed. So when someone comes in the ecosystem, there basically aren't any questions. People can just go in and out and understand how to use it. That's the goal. The last thing component is platform improvements on the Avalanche side. There's going to be continuous performance improvements on all of the chains on Avalanche. Hopefully governance is something that follows shortly after there. And I think those are the kind of the main pieces. Oh, and exchange listings is kind of always ongoing. That's something that's also super important too, because liquidity, of course, is important for this ecosystem to actually work, right? And in terms of the Cosmos community, I feel like most of your listeners are probably from the Cosmos space, especially with the when IBC comments. I think what would be helpful, and this is why I love that we got connected, was education. So I've known about Cosmos since the beginning of time, but like you, when you kind of talked about how you started to focus in on Cosmos projects on your podcast, I just was like, all right, well, I kind of know what Cosmos is high level. I know kind of like the 3 bullet points of what it is, and I know some of the guys on that team, the Tenorment team. But other than that, I don't really know much about it. So I think what would really help is just ping me on Twitter, like or Telegram or whatever channels. Give me ideas, and maybe we can have very off the record conversations of just saying like, hey, what about this, or have you thought about that, or have you heard about this project? This project is just like this. I need all the help I can get, because I'm already, and this is myself and also the rest of the team, and yourself included too, we're all so heads down with the main thing that's immediately in front of us that I don't have time, even if I wanted to make it, to take on that. So in terms of Twitter, I think the call to action is, I guess my Twitter for now, JAYKS17. That's my handle. DM me. My DMs are open. Always like to talk about anything and everything crypto, but also music, photography, if you want to chime into that too. So I think that's the community call, and then hopefully we can bring something together, because at the end of the day, with enough signal, that's when we're able to chase that with confidence.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think the Cosmos project is right now also in a stage where, it makes sense, because IBC went live in March of this year. And for those who don't know at all, maybe, from the Avalanche community, but also other communities, what IBC is, it's this inter-blockchain communication protocol that is kind of like the TCP/IP standard for the blockchain economy. So it enables connectivity and transactions between sovereign blockchains. That's kind of like the short sales pitch here. And it took a few months for IBC to get real adoption. So there's a site called Map of Zones. And what you can do there, you can see the IBC activity and traffic, right? And for a couple of months, it was pretty silent, right? Of course, you can swap from one chain to another, from the Cosmos chain to Akash, to Sentinel, to Persistence, but you couldn't do much with it. And then Osmosis launched on June 19 of this year, 2.5 months ago, and took it completely viral. So that's an AMM with, also yield farming opportunities, obviously, that are pretty good. It's, in my opinion, the best kept secret in crypto right now. And I'm sure there's some things also on Avalanche that I have not looked into, and like, man, we're farming here and there, and it's crazy. I don't know why people are not doing that. So that's kind of like where I see Osmosis right now.
What was the first website that you said? Something Zone?
Map of Zones. Mapofzones.com. Yes. Awesome. Mapofzones.com.
I'll check it out.
And everybody can just check out the stats there, IBC traffic, and then also on mintscan.io, I think. Mintscan.io, yes. There's also now a section called IBC relayers, and then you can see from all the chains that are packed through IBC or connected to each other, how many channels there are. And even I think today or yesterday, they added even the number of transactions that routes through these channels, through these relayers, and also their total value in dollars. Like, there's so many cool details that you can go really deep into. I think, I mean, it's, Terra is now implementing IBC. So that brings over Luna, obviously, $10 billion plus ecosystem, plus UST, which is going to be the first stable coin coming to the Cosmos ecosystem, and coming to Osmosis and Gravity DEX, which is another AMM that just launched. So I think there's so many things that are now only coming together, which is probably why over the past years, people have kind of like forgotten Cosmos. But I see that it's just coming together now, since basically July. that there's more hype, buzz also now on social media. More and more Cosmos getting onto this Lunar Crash rankings and Avalanche as well, right? So I think it makes sense to explore these things. There was actually, I think, one more question from somebody regarding just Avalanche, nothing to do with Cosmos, from Cryptomancer. He's asking whether the AVAX seed chain, and I'm not sure if I understand this question correctly, but does AVAX seed chain block produce protocol has leader based? And if so, how can it be assured attacks can stop block production?
Oh yeah, I think I saw that, and so it's currently leaderless, but there are changes being made. What we're gonna do is, because I shouldn't be the one to go into the details of the technical side of things, we're actually going to create collateral on the Avalanche blog to really explain that, because I think for those that care about that, it is important to understand. And so I think what I would say to that answer is not to lead with anything incorrect, and just stay tuned to the blog post once that comes out, and we'll stay up to date on that answer.
Yeah, and I think that's also definitely one kind of like community feedback, maybe like you said earlier. You have kind of like these three chains, and people don't really know how they communicate to each other, what they do, and how they interoperate. But I think there needs to be a bit more kind of like clarity and seamless integrations here. But I think that's just a matter of time. It's
yeah, exactly. Yep.
Maybe we can wrap things up with the last question, final question to tip off the conversation. Doug is asking, can Avalanche be a hub on the Cosmos and interoperate with every Cosmos-based chains? So
this is through IBC though, right?
Yeah. I mean, theoretically, you guys could, integrate IBC. I don't know. Obviously, on a technical layer, I have no clue. I would have to connect you to people like Jack or even Sunny. That's kind of like how you could bring over the entire Avalanche ecosystem and everything that's built on top of it onto Cosmos and make it a Cosmos hub, and then also integrate the liquidity and all those kind of things. So I think.
So here's the answer. I think yes, if someone on the Cosmos side can tell us how to do it, or at least help us how to do it, and I'm happy to be the connector. Would love to make that happen. I think this goes for any chain, not just Cosmos, to be honest. But I know for just to kind of bring up what I said before, was we have talked about it internally, and there were some roadblocks, and because of just other things that were on the roadmap, it just kind of got a little bit forgotten on our side. Really no reason besides the fact that we don't have bandwidth. But from there, let's get those conversations going. Maybe I can connect to the right people, and maybe this is what you and I had basically catalyzed then the start of something great.
Maybe. I mean, it would be awesome, and I'm happy to also kind of like not just kind of like raise awareness on things like osmosis, where people can create a passive income, but also help contribute within the crypto space, even though I don't have any technical background at all. But just to understand, like, hey man, it would make sense, on a high level. Why don't we just bridge those ecosystems, right? And I think the Solana guys are also very open with their wormhole bridge to kind of like make it also IBC compatible and integrate and establish bridges there, and also with Avalanche and other ecosystems. So yeah, I'm always about connecting and out cooperating the competition. I think that's one slogan that Gregory Landua, who's also a builder in Cosmos, has brought into my mind, and that's kind of like my motto here, my slogan.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I really appreciate the time, especially these days with the Avalanche ecosystem going viral. So yeah, thank you so much for being on, and I'll leave all the links to your Twitter and to the website, obviously, and all those kind of things.
Cool.
Under this video. So yeah, thanks so much, and I guess we'll definitely keep in touch.
Let's do it. This was great. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Take care, man.